Let's take it back to the unforgettable year of 2007. The first ever iPhone is released, the cult classic Superbad is released nationwide, and Soulja Boy takes over the internet for the very first time. Meanwhile, on the hardwood, the 2007 season would go down as one of the most unforgettable seasons in NBA history. An unlikely star was crowned MVP, a familiar force returned to dominance, and a young king was quickly becoming the league's undisputed king. You're going to want to stay tuned for this one, so join us as we do a deep dive into this critical year in the NBA in the year 2007, a year in review. The Dallas Mavericks were fresh off one of the most heartbreaking finals losses in NBA history. After being up 2-0 in the finals and a championship within grasp, Dallas would end up losing the next 4 games to kiss their chances at a title goodbye. So as close as they had been the season prior, unsurprisingly, Dallas ran it back with the same crew in 2007, led by 9-year veteran Dirk Nowitzki. In this season, Dirk reached a level of offensive efficiency few in the history of the NBA had ever reached, joining the elusive 50-40-90 club, shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line. Dirk led these Mavericks to one of the best regular seasons ever recorded by an NBA team this season, winning 67 games. These Mavericks were deep, they were well coached, they were hungry, and they were led by one of the greatest players of the decade in Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk would go on to win his first ever league MVP, becoming the first European to ever win the lucrative award. But as great as Dirk was in 2007, the best player on the planet was still Kobe, who retired number 8 and began rocking jersey number 24 this year. There aren't enough adjectives to describe just how special Kobe was during this phase of his career. He had 0 flaws in his game. On the offensive end, he was as pure of a scorer the league had ever seen, as good as, if not maybe even better than Michael Jordan in his heyday. Defensively also, he was a menace, earning himself another first-team all-defensive selection, the 5th of his career. However, unfortunately for Kobe, as has been the case the Shaq's departure in 2004, his team was not championship ready. Made up of too many young, below-average and role players, the Lakers as an organization were failing the most talented player in basketball during his prime by not surrounding him with another all-star or at least an above-average supporting cast. And so the Lakers in 2007 were again mediocre at best. Despite his team's struggles though, Kobe would lead the league in scoring for a second straight season, averaging 31 points per game, including an incredulous 4-game streak that saw him score 65, 50, 60, and then another 50. During this phase of his career, Kobe was putting up 50 like it was nothing. Kobe's heroics on a nightly basis only elevated his Lakers to the 7th seed in a highly competitive Western Conference. This conference featured the best teams in the league, but the best of them all by a wide margin was the 67-win Dallas Mavericks. League MVP Dirk Nowitzki and a supporting cast of veterans and battle-tested role players who had just made the finals a year prior were looking to punch their ticket to their second straight NBA finals and redeem last year's finals loss. As the first round got underway, these Mavericks would face the 8th-seeded Golden State Warriors, who hadn't made the playoffs in 13 years and who barely squeaked into the playoffs this year. Could these Warriors even win one game? No one was giving them a shot. But these Warriors weren't your typical 8 seed. They played with speed, they played with swagger, and although they lacked a true star, they had an edge, unity, and belief in themselves that made them lethal. Long, athletic wings like Matt Barnes, Steven Jackson, and Al Harrington completely threw Dirk off his game. The Warriors prioritized speed and pace over size and grit, headlined by explosive point guard Baron Davis, whose combination of size, strength, speed, and athleticism was exactly what this team needed. With every game, Golden State's confidence continued to grow, and their home crowd in Oracle Arena was loud, rowdy, and really kickstarted the pace that these Warriors were hoping for every single night. On the other end of the matchup, Dallas just could not match Golden State's speed, energy, and belief, and after a historic 67-win season, these Mavericks ended the season in embarrassing fashion, made victim to the greatest upset in NBA history by losing to the 8th-seeded Warriors in the first round. The We Believe Warriors became a cultural phenomenon, and although they wound up losing in the second round to the Utah Jazz, their imprint on the Golden State franchise and the entire league was special and long-lasting. In the second round of these playoffs, point guard Baron Davis completed a dunk, that perfectly encapsulates this historic playoff run.
Getting the basketball, because a lot of good things will happen, not just with him scoring, but then also it open up.
Oh, man!
Hello.
Timeout in Barron's house.
With Dallas eliminated, all eyes turned to the second round of the Western Conference playoffs between the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs. These were now officially the two best teams in the league, and the winner of this series was almost certainly likely to win the NBA championship. Phoenix, led by two-time MVP Steve Nash and a now healthy Amari Stoudemire, were poised to take their high-octane offense all the way in 2007. And seemingly always standing in Phoenix's way were the San Antonio Spurs. The trio of Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili had become one of the most consistent and dominant forces in the league. And as the playoffs between these two Western Conference juggernauts got underway, there was no holding back. The intensity was fierce, the play was physical, and both teams were going back and forth. The series reached its climax in Game 4, with Phoenix approaching a victory to tie up the series 2 games apiece. Nash was dribbling the ball up the right side in the final seconds of the game until Spurs forward Robert Horry violently hip-checked Nash out of bounds. It was unnecessary, flagrant, and most observers call it cheap and uncalled for. This caused Amari Stoudemire, who was on the bench at the time, to leave the bench area and tend to his teammate. Under the letter of the NBA law, a player on the bench is not allowed to leave the bench under any circumstance. So in probably one of the most controversial calls in NBA history, Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw were suspended for the pivotal 5th game of the series in Phoenix. San Antonio ultimately won that game and the series in 6, crushing Phoenix's hope of a title in 2007. Amari's suspension was and still is the most egregious call in NBA history. It shaped the trajectory of the series, and with this being Phoenix's best shot at a title, for it to get rejected because of a league suspension is incredibly disappointing for not just Phoenix fans, but for basketball fans all around. At that point, if you're Commissioner David Stern, you've got to let that suspension go. You've got to let Phoenix's full squad face off against San Antonio's full squad in Game 5 and see what happens. And seeing as though the pivotal Game 5 was in Phoenix, it's not inconceivable that Phoenix would have won that game and the entire series in general. In any case, as heartbreaking of a playoff loss that was, San Antonio emerged as one of the final 4 teams remaining. In the Eastern Conference, the Detroit Pistons, who had been dominating its conference for a number of years now, were once again in the conference finals, and this time against the 22-year-old phenom LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. LeBron's supporting cast in Cleveland was probably even more inferior to Kobe's Lakers, which made his ability to not only win 50 games, but also reach the conference finals this season an almost impossible feat. There was no doubt that Kobe was still the best player in this season, but what LeBron was able to accomplish in the regular season and in these playoffs turned heads, and what he did in these Eastern Conference finals, in some critics' minds, changed the debate to who truly was the league's best. Against the battle-tested and championship-driven Detroit Pistons, LeBron took his very inferior team to a pivotal Game 5 in Detroit, with the series tied 2-2 and a chance to take a commanding 3-2 lead. At this point of the series and season for that matter, LeBron had already done enough. He had changed the narrative on him and Kobe, and had already established himself as one of, if not the league's best. If the season ended for him here, it would have been a success. But he was not done. In Game 5, he logged a mind-boggling 48 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists, which included Cleveland's final 25 points in a double overtime thriller. Cleveland beat Detroit in Detroit, and the entire crowd and frankly the entire league was in shock. This Game 5 performance will become LeBron's crowning achievement in his young career, as he let the entire world know that we were officially in the LeBron James era of NBA basketball. To everyone's surprise, LeBron and Cleveland defeated Detroit to punch their ticket to the NBA Finals. But as the finals got underway, unfortunately for LeBron, this is where his miracle season would come to an end. His Cavs had no business being in the finals, and their mere presence in these finals was an impressive achievement in and of itself. San Antonio was just too deep, too talented, and too experienced to let a 22-year-old beat them. San Antonio swept Cleveland to no one's surprise, and the Spurs, in a quiet yet dominant fashion, hoisted their 4th title in 9 years. And for the decade, San Antonio had 3 titles to match LA's 3 titles from earlier in the decade. The end of the 2007 season marked a crippling end for 2 establishments. First up, the Phoenix Suns. After their round 2 bloodbath with Phoenix, the Spurs would lose only 1 game thereafter en route to the championship, making it very plausible that Phoenix, if not for suspensions to Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw, could have been crowned champions in 2007. This would have solidified the Steve Nash era in Phoenix with at least 1 championship. In an alternate universe with Phoenix crowned champions, who knows how that would have greatly benefited and further shaped Steve Nash's legacy. Just as Steph Curry is revered for changing the game of basketball in the mid-2010s, you have to assume that Nash is praised at the same level for what he did for the game of basketball in the mid-2000s. Next up is Kobe. At the end of the 2007 season, his title as the league's best is more or less usurped by LeBron James. Conference imbalance aside, what LeBron was able to do with a roster that was just as inferior as Kobe's spoke to LeBron's greatness as well as Kobe's limitations. And with Shaq having won his first championship without Kobe the year prior in 2006, the pressure cooker would reach an all-time high in the summer of 2007, heading into 2008. Kobe had no time to waste away any more years of his prime. He needed a star in LA, or he needed to get out of LA to salvage his legacy. We were all headed for an explosion in the 2007 offseason. More on that in the next video.